The midnight moon cast long shadows across Fort Worth, Texas, as Lillian Evans stumbled from the stagecoach, clutching her meager belongings in a worn carpetbag. Her face, though smudged with travel dust, couldn't hide the haunted look in her emerald eyes, a look that had followed her like a stubborn shadow all the way from Boston to this frontier town in 1876. "Last stop, Fort Worth," the driver called out, tossing down her second bag without ceremony. Lillian nodded her thanks, though her throat felt too tight for words. Fort Worth sprawled before her, a bustling cattle town with its timber and brick buildings lining the main street, oil lamps casting pools of yellow light that did little to dispel the darkness between them. Cowboys and cattlemen moved through the thoroughfare despite the late hour, and piano music drifted from saloons where raucous laughter punctuated the night. She had come west with nothing but $23 sewn into her hem, her nursing skills, and the desperate need to escape the whispers that had followed her in Boston. Here, she hoped to start anew where no one knew her name or the tragedy that had shattered her life. "Madam, you need assistance," a porter from the station approached, eyeing her uncertainly. "No, thank you." Her voice emerged steadier than she felt. "Could you direct me to Mrs. Holliday's boarding house? I've arranged lodging there." The porter pointed down the street. "3 blocks that way, madam. White house with the blue trim. Can't miss it." Gathering her courage along with her bags, Lillian made her way through the unfamiliar streets. Fort Worth had grown considerably since the railroad had arrived 3 years prior, transforming from a frontier outpost to a thriving cattle town. She passed saloons where men's voices rose in boisterous song, a general store with its windows darkened for the night, and a doctor's office where she hoped to find employment. The boarding house stood just as described, a respectable 2-story structure with neat blue trim and a small porch. A lamp burned in the window, and Lillian felt a momentary relief. She climbed the steps and knocked firmly. The door swung open to reveal a stout woman in her 50s, gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, her expression wary until recognition dawned. "Miss Evans, we'd nearly given up on you. Your stage was expected hours ago. There was trouble with a wheel near Dallas. I apologize for the late arrival, Mrs. Holliday." The woman nodded, opening the door wider. "Well, you're here now. I've got your room ready upstairs, first door on the right. Breakfast at 6 sharp. No gentlemen callers in the rooms, and I lock the doors at 10 each night." "I understand. Thank you." Mrs. Holliday eyed her curiously. "You're the nurse from Boston, correct? Dr. Wilson mentioned you'd be arriving. He's expecting you at his office tomorrow morning." Lillian nodded, relief washing over her. At least her position seemed secure. "You'll find Fort Worth different from Boston," Mrs. Holliday continued as she led Lillian upstairs. "Rougher around the edges, but decent folk mostly. The cattle drives bring all sorts through town, but we manage." The room was small but clean, a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a porcelain basin, a simple dresser, and a chair beside the window that overlooked the street. It was more than Lillian had hoped for after her long journey. "Thank you," she said quietly. "This will do nicely." Mrs. Holliday lingered in the doorway. "You're awful young to be traveling alone. Family back east?" Lillian's expression closed instantly. "No, no family." Something in her tone made the older woman nod without further questions. "Well then, get some rest. Morning comes early in Fort Worth." Alone at last, Lillian set her bags down and sank onto the edge of the bed. The tears she'd held at bay during the long journey threatened to spill over, but she forced them back. She had cried enough in Boston. Here, she would be different, stronger, impenetrable. No one would ever again see the pain that lived inside her like a constant companion. She unpacked methodically her modest dresses, a small wooden box containing her mother's cameo, medical texts she'd studied diligently, and finally, a small daguerreotype she placed face down in the dresser drawer. Some memories were best kept hidden, even from herself. As exhaustion claimed her, Lillian drifted to sleep with the sounds of this strange new town serenading her distant piano music, the occasional shout, the whistle of a late-night train. Tomorrow would begin her new life, one where no one knew her secrets or the weight she carried. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through thin curtains, and the smell of coffee and bacon wafting up from below. Lillian dressed carefully in her best navy blue dress, pinned her honey blonde hair into a practical knot, and descended to the dining room where several other boarders were already gathered. "Miss Evans, join us," Mrs. Holliday called, gesturing to an empty chair. "Everyone, this is Miss Lillian Evans from Boston. She'll be working with Dr. Wilson." Nods and murmured greetings met this announcement as Lillian took her seat. She noted 3 other women, 2 schoolteachers, and a seamstress, and 2 men who worked at the bank. They seemed friendly enough, though curious about the newcomer. "Boston's a fair distance to travel," commented one of the schoolteachers, Miss Perkins, a woman of about 30 with kind eyes. "What brings you all the way to Fort Worth?" "The opportunity," Lillian answered simply, the practiced response coming easily. "There's great need for medical care in growing towns. Dr. Wilson's a good man," offered Mr. Jenkins, the older of the bank clerks. "Lost his nurse to marriage last spring, been struggling to keep up since." Breakfast passed with polite conversation that Lillian navigated carefully, revealing little about herself while learning about Fort Worth and its inhabitants. By 7 o'clock, she was making her way toward the doctor's office, a modest building on the main street with a freshly painted sign. "Dr. Thomas Wilson, physician and surgeon." A bell jangled as she entered, finding a tidy waiting room with several chairs and medical pamphlets neatly arranged on a small table. A door to the rear opened, revealing a man in his early 40s with graying temples and spectacles perched on his nose. "Miss Evans, I presume?" His smile was genuine as he extended his hand. "I'm Thomas Wilson. I can't tell you how pleased I am that you've arrived." His handshake was firm, and Lillian immediately sensed a competent, no-nonsense manner about him that eased her anxiety. "I'm eager to begin, Doctor Wilson. I brought my credentials and letters of reference." She handed him the envelope she'd carried across the country. "Excellent, though hardly necessary. Dr. Montgomery's recommendation was glowing enough." He glanced through the papers nonetheless. "Boston General Hospital is a fine institution. Your experience with surgical assistants will be particularly valuable here." He gave her a brief tour of the facility's examination rooms, a small surgical area, storage for medicines and supplies, all meticulously organized despite the modest surroundings. "We see everything from birthing babies to bullet wounds," Dr. Wilson explained. "Cattle drives bring injuries, the railroad brings illness, and the saloons bring both. Can you handle that variety?" "I assisted with amputations during my training," Lillian said quietly. "I believe I can manage whatever comes through that door, Doctor." Wilson studied her for a moment, noting the shadows beneath her eyes and the careful way she held herself. "Fort Worth isn't Boston, Miss Evans. People will ask questions about a young woman traveling alone. I've found that competence usually silences questions," she replied evenly. He nodded, seeming satisfied. "Well then, let's begin. Mrs. Thornton is due any minute with her youngest persistent ear infections that I suspect may require more aggressive treatment." The day passed in a blur of patients' children with fevers, a cowhand with a badly sprained wrist, an elderly man with a chronic cough, and a young woman seeking advice about her pregnancy. Lillian moved efficiently between tasks, sterilizing instruments, preparing medicines, assisting Dr. Wilson, and keeping meticulous records. By late afternoon, when they had a momentary lull, Dr. Wilson leaned against the desk with an approving expression. "You're everything Dr. Montgomery promised and more, Miss Evans. I believe this arrangement will work splendidly." "Thank you, Doctor. I'm grateful for the opportunity." He hesitated, then said gently, "I notice you didn't mention family in Boston. Do you have connections here in Texas?" "No." The word came sharply, and she immediately softened her tone. "I prefer to look forward, not back." Understanding crossed his face. "Fair enough. We all come west for our reasons, Miss Evans. Some we share, some we don't." He checked his pocket watch. "It's nearly 5. We'll close up shortly, but first I should warn you about our final appointment, Barnett Caldwell." She looked up from the supplies she was organizing. "Is there something I should know?" Caldwell runs the largest cattle operation north of town. Tough as old leather, stubborn as a mule, and he hates doctors. Only comes in when he absolutely must, usually after his foreman or ranch hands practically drag him. As if summoned by the mention, the front door swung open with such force that the bell nearly came loose from its fixture. Lillian turned to see a man filling the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, and radiating irritation. His face was partially obscured by several days' growth of beard, and his clothes bore the dust and wear of hard ranch work. A wide-brimmed hat sat low over intense eyes that immediately locked onto Dr. Wilson. "Don't start lecturing, Doc," the man growled, his deep voice matching his imposing presence. "Just fix it so I can get back to work." Dr. Wilson sighed. "Miss Evans, meet Mr. Barnett Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell, my new nurse, Miss Evans from Boston." The rancher barely glanced at Lillian before brushing past her into the examination room. She caught a glimpse of blood-soaked cloth wrapped around his left forearm. "What happened this time?" Dr. Wilson asked, following him. "Barbed wire. Damn invention of the devil." Lillian gathered fresh bandages and antiseptic solution, moving efficiently as Dr. Wilson unwrapped the makeshift bandage. The wound was ugly, a deep gash that had clearly been bleeding for hours and showed signs of infection beginning. "How long ago did this happen, Mr. Caldwell?" she asked professionally. His eyes flicked to her, properly seeing her for the first time. They were a startling blue against his sun-bronzed face. "Yesterday." "Yesterday," Dr. Wilson exclaimed. "And you've been working with it like this?" "It needs stitching and cleaning before blood poisoning sets in." Caldwell shrugged his massive shoulders. "Had cattle to move." Lillian prepared the instruments while Dr. Wilson cleansed the wound. She noted how the rancher remained stoically silent, though the muscle in his jaw twitched as the antiseptic solution hit raw flesh. "Hold his arm steady, Miss Evans, while I place the sutures," Dr. Wilson instructed. She positioned herself across from the doctor and placed her hands on Caldwell's forearm to stabilize it. The moment her fingers touched his skin, she felt him tense. His eyes met hers, questioning and somewhat surprised at the gentleness of her touch. "Deep breath, Mr. Caldwell," she said calmly. "This will sting." He didn't look away from her as Dr. Wilson began stitching, his gaze intense and evaluating. Lillian maintained her professional demeanor, though she was acutely aware of his scrutiny. "You're new," he finally said, his voice less gruff. "Boston," he said. "Yes, I arrived yesterday, long way from home." Something in his tone suggested understanding rather than mere curiosity, and Lillian found herself responding more honestly than she had to others. "Fort Worth is home now." He nodded slightly, as if this confirmed something. "Texas grows on you, even with its devils like barbed wire and rattlesnakes, and stubborn ranchers who wait a day to seek medical attention," Dr. Wilson added dryly as he tied off the last stitch. Caldwell's mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Some things can't be helped, Doc." Lillian began wrapping clean bandages around his arm. "The wound needs to be kept clean and dry. You should return in 3 days so we can check for infection." 3 days, he frowned. "I don't have time for that." "Make time," she replied firmly, surprising herself with her boldness. "Unless you'd prefer to lose the arm entirely." Dr. Wilson glanced at her with raised eyebrows, clearly not accustomed to anyone speaking so directly to Barnett Caldwell. The rancher studied her for a long moment, then gave a short nod. 3 days. As she finished securing the bandage, Lillian noticed other scars on his arm and hand, testament to years of hard work and danger. This man lived a life utterly different from the one she had known in Boston. "Keep the arm elevated when possible," she added, stepping back, "and limit its use." Caldwell stood, towering over her 5'5" frame. "Anything else, Miss Evans from Boston?" There was a challenge in his voice, but also something else, a grudging respect, perhaps. "Yes." "Next time, don't wait a day before seeing the doctor." That almost smile appeared again. He settled his hat back on his head, paid Dr. Wilson, and moved toward the door. At the threshold, he turned back. "Welcome to Fort Worth, Miss Evans. It's not Boston, but it has its merits." Then he was gone, leaving the scent of leather, soap, and open prairie in his wake. Dr. Wilson chuckled. "Well, I've never seen Caldwell take to someone so quickly. Usually he barely acknowledges my existence, let alone makes conversation." Lillian began cleaning the instruments, her movements precise. "He seems difficult. Barnett Caldwell has his reasons." Dr. Wilson's tone grew thoughtful. "Lost his wife and child to fever 5 years back. Hasn't been the same since. Throws himself into that ranch like a man possessed, as if working himself to death might ease whatever he carries inside." He glanced at Lillian. "Some pain isn't visible to the naked eye, wouldn't you agree?" She kept her expression carefully neutral. "We all have our burdens, Doctor." "Indeed we do." He patted her shoulder gently. "You did well today, Miss Evans. I'll see you tomorrow morning." Lillian walked back to the boarding house as twilight descended on Fort Worth. The streets were busy with evening activity, cowboys fresh off the trail looking for entertainment, families finishing their shopping, freight wagons making late deliveries. She moved through it all with her head high, though she felt the curious glances from those she passed. A woman alone, new to town, would naturally draw attention. At supper that evening, Mrs. Holliday's table was lively with conversation. The other boarders were eager to hear about Lillian's first day, and she shared carefully edited highlights while redirecting questions whenever possible. "So you met Barnett Caldwell," Miss Perkins said when Lillian mentioned the rancher's visit. "What did you make of him?" "He seemed dedicated to his work," Lillian replied diplomatically. Mr. Jenkins snorted. "That's one way of putting it. Man's been driving himself, and everyone who works for him like there's no tomorrow ever since he lost Elizabeth and the baby." "Jenkins," Mrs. Holliday said sharply, "that's not appropriate dinner conversation." "It's common knowledge," the bank clerk shrugged. Finest lady in the county by all accounts. Caldwell was a different man, then smiled more, came to town socials, even sang in the church choir, if you can believe it. When that fever took them both, something in him just hardened. Lillian felt an unwelcome pang of recognition. She knew too well how loss could transform a person from the inside out. "He's still a good man," offered Miss Simmons, the younger schoolteacher. "Donated lumber when the school needed repairs last winter, and he employs half the men in the county. Just keeps to himself mostly. Except when he's bleeding all over Dr. Wilson's examination room," Lillian added, attempting to lighten the conversation. This brought chuckles from around the table, and the talk mercifully shifted to other topics. After helping clear the dishes, Lillian excused herself to her room, claiming fatigue from her first day. Alone, she sat by the window watching as Fort Worth settled into evening rhythms. In the distance, she could see the glow of campfires where cattle herds rested for the night. The vastness of Texas stretched beyond, so different from the crowded, narrow streets of Boston. She withdrew a small journal from her bag and began to write, the simple act of recording her thoughts, a habit that had sustained her through the darkest days after what happened in Boston. Tonight, she found her pen lingering over descriptions of the rancher, those piercing blue eyes that seemed to look through pretenses. The way his expression softened momentarily when she touched his arm, the resilience evident in every line of his weathered face. Barnett Caldwell was a man who understood pain, she realized. He wore his grief differently than she wore hers, but the weight of it was recognizable nonetheless. 3 days later, true to his word if not his nature, Barnett Caldwell returned to Dr. Wilson's office. Lillian was alone when he arrived, the doctor having been called to a difficult berth at a farm outside town. "Mr. Caldwell," she greeted him, professional but not unfriendly. "Please come in. Dr. Wilson is attending a birth, but I can examine your wound." He hesitated in the doorway, hat already removed and held awkwardly in his good hand. "I can come back when the doctor returns. That could be hours. I'm fully qualified to check for infection and change your bandage." She gestured to the examination room. "Unless you'd prefer to risk that arm after all." A flicker of that almost smile appeared. "You don't mince words, do you?" "I find directness saves time, Mr. Caldwell, something a busy rancher might appreciate." He followed her into the examination room and sat where she indicated. The morning light through the window caught the gold and red highlights in his brown hair as he bent his head, watching her gather supplies. "How does it feel?" she asked, unwrapping the bandage carefully. "Itches. Throbs when the weather changes. Both normal." The wound looked better than she'd expected, the stitches holding well, minimal redness, no purulent discharge. "You've been keeping it clean." "Following doctor's orders." "Nurse's orders in this case," she corrected, cleaning around the wound gently. His eyes studied her face as she worked. "How's Fort Worth treating you, Miss Evans?" The question caught her off guard. "Well enough. Everyone has been kind." But she glanced up, surprised by his perception. "But nothing. I'm settling in fine. You don't look like you're sleeping much." Her hands stilled momentarily before resuming their work. "I wasn't aware my sleeping habits were any concern of yours, Mr. Caldwell." "They're not." He didn't sound apologetic, just an observation. She applied a fresh bandage without responding. His directness was unsettling, too close to seeing what she worked so hard to conceal. "New places take getting used to," he continued, his voice softer. "Different sounds at night, different people, different memories trying to form over the old ones." Lillian secured the bandage with slightly more force than necessary. "These stitches can come out in another 4 days. Dr. Wilson can do it, or I can if you prefer." He flexed his fingers experimentally. "You have a steady hand. I'll take my chances with you." She moved to the basin to wash her hands, keeping her back to him as she struggled to maintain her composure. Something about Barnett Caldwell threatened the carefully constructed walls she'd built around herself. "Is there anything else you need, Mr. Caldwell?" He stood, towering in the small room. "No, Miss Evans, thank you." As he reached for the door, he paused. "My ranch is hosting a gathering this Saturday. End of the spring cattle drive celebration. Nothing fancy, just a barbecue and some music. The whole town usually comes." He settled his hat on his head, You'd be welcome. The invitation surprised her. I don't just a thought. He cut off her refusal gently. Might help with getting to know folks, making Fort Worth feel more like home. Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving Lillian staring at the closed door with an unsettling sense that Barnett Caldwell saw far more than she wanted anyone to see. When Dr. Wilson returned later that afternoon, tired but pleased after delivering a healthy baby boy, he was surprised to hear of Caldwell's visit. He actually came back for a checkup, voluntarily. The doctor shook his head in disbelief. In 5 years, I've never known him to follow medical advice so precisely. The wound is healing well, Lillian reported, not mentioning the invitation. Dr. Wilson gave her a curious look. Something about you seems to have made an impression on our resident recluse. I doubt that, doctor. I simply treated his wound. Later that evening, however, Mrs. Holliday brought up the upcoming gathering at Caldwell Ranch during supper. It's the social event of the season, the landlady explained. The whole town turns out. Barnett Caldwell may keep to himself most days, but his spring celebration is legendary. Music, dancing, the best barbecue in 3 counties. Will you be attending, Miss Evans? Asked Miss Simmons eagerly. We could all go together. Most of the eligible men in the county will be there. I haven't decided, Lillian replied non-committally. The idea of a crowded social gathering made her uneasy. In Boston, she'd avoided such events for over a year, finding the forced gaiety and curious glances unbearable. You should come, urged Miss Perkins. It's a good way to meet people outside of Dr. Wilson's office. Besides, the Caldwell Ranch's beautiful sits on a rise overlooking the Trinity River with the finest house for 50 miles. Lillian found herself wondering what kind of home Barnett Caldwell had built, whether it still bore traces of the family he'd lost, or if he'd erased those memories as thoroughly as she tried to erase her own. Perhaps was all she committed to, though the idea of seeing the rancher again stirred an uncomfortable mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The remainder of the week passed in a steady rhythm of patients and procedures. Fort Worth suffered no shortage of medical needs, from the expected injuries of frontier life to the typical illnesses that plagued any growing town. Lillian threw herself into the work, grateful for the distraction from her thoughts and memories. By Saturday morning, she'd nearly convinced herself to avoid the Caldwell Ranch celebration. Large gatherings still triggered the panicked feeling that had become all too familiar in Boston. Yet when Miss Perkins and Miss Simmons knocked on her door, already dressed in their finest, something made her hesitate. "You're not even dressed yet," Miss Simmons exclaimed. "We need to leave in 20 minutes if we want good seats on the wagon." "I'm not certain I should attend," Lillian began. Miss Perkins sat beside her on the bed. "Lillian, you've been here nearly 2 weeks and haven't left Mrs. Holliday's or the doctor's office except to walk between the two. That's no way to make a home in a new place." The gentle observation struck home. Wasn't that why she'd come to Texas? To build a new life, not hide from one. "Very well," she conceded. "Give me 15 minutes. She selected her best dress, a deep green that complemented her eyes, with modest lace at the collar and cuffs. Her honey blonde hair she arranged simply but attractively, allowing a few soft curls to frame her face. Looking in the small mirror, Lillian barely recognized herself. It had been so long since she'd dressed for anything but work or solitude. The journey to Caldwell Ranch took almost an hour by wagon, with Mr. Jenkins driving and the 3 women seated behind him. As they left the growing bustle of Fort Worth behind, Lillian found herself captivated by the Texas landscape, rolling prairies stretching toward distant hills, wildflowers dotting the green expanses, cattle grazing in the distance. "It's beautiful," she murmured, almost to herself. "Wait until you see the ranch," Miss Perkins replied. "It sits on the prettiest spot in the county." She was right. As they crested a gentle rise, Caldwell Ranch spread before them, a sprawling property with a large white painted house commanding the highest point, overlooking corrals, barns, bunkhouses, and beyond them, the silver ribbon of the Trinity River winding through verdant pastureland. Dozens of wagons and riders were already arriving, converging on a large cleared area near the main house where tables had been set up and smoke rose from barbecue pits. "Caldwell runs nearly 10,000 acres," Mr. Jenkins explained as he guided their wagon toward the gathering. "One of the most successful operations in North Texas, despite everything." Lillian didn't need to ask what everything meant. The loss of his family hung over any mention of Barnett Caldwell like an unspoken shadow. They joined the growing crowd, where it seemed half of Fort Worth had indeed turned out. Long tables groaned under the weight of food: barbecued beef, beans, cornbread, pies of every description. A band was setting up near an area cleared for dancing, and children raced excitedly between groups of adults catching up on news and gossip. Lillian felt immediately overwhelmed by the noise and crush of people. She smiled politely as Miss Perkins introduced her to what seemed like dozens of townsfolk, but she found herself drifting toward the periphery of the gathering, seeking space to breathe. She eventually found herself near a split-rail fence overlooking the river valley. The view was spectacular, the water catching golden afternoon light, cattle grazing peacefully on the opposite bank, wildflowers painting the landscape in splashes of color. "Better than Boston." She startled at the deep voice behind her, turning to find Barnett Caldwell standing a few feet away. He looked different today, clean-shaven, wearing a crisp white shirt and dark vest that emphasized his broad shoulders. His blue eyes seemed even more striking against his sun-darkened skin. "I didn't mean to startle you," he added, moving to stand beside her at the fence. "It's beautiful," she admitted. "Different, but beautiful in its own way." He nodded, looking out over his land with quiet pride. "I came here with nothing but $20 and a broken-down horse 15 years ago. Worked as a hand until I could buy my own small parcel, built from there." "You've accomplished a great deal." Had help along the way. Something in his tone suggested those memories were bittersweet. He glanced at her arm. "How are you finding the celebration?" "It's lovely. Very lively." A knowing look crossed his face. "Which is why you're standing out here alone instead of enjoying it." Lillian felt her cheeks warm. "I'm not particularly comfortable in crowds. That makes two of us." He surprised her with this admission. "I host this gathering every year because Elizabeth believed in celebrating community. But I usually find a reason to step away more than once." The mention of his wife's name was casual, but Lillian noted how his fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on the fence rail. "How's the arm?" she asked, changing the subject. He flexed it demonstratively. "Healing. Your stitching is neat." "I had an excellent teacher in Boston." Caldwell studied her for a moment. "What brought you all the way to Fort Worth, Miss Evans? The truth, not the answer you give everyone else." The directness of the question caught her off guard. "That's rather personal, Mr. Caldwell." "Yes." He didn't apologize or withdraw the question. Lillian turned back to the view, gathering her thoughts. Something about this man made her want to be honest in a way she hadn't been with anyone since leaving Boston. "I needed to start again somewhere no one knew me," she finally said. "Somewhere without memories around every corner," he nodded, as if this confirmed something he'd already suspected. "Running from something or toward something. Both, perhaps." The band struck up a lively tune, drawing their attention back to the gathering. People were forming up for dancing, laughter rising above the music. "Would you care to dance, Miss Evans?" Caldwell asked unexpectedly. She looked at him in surprise. "I thought you didn't enjoy these gatherings." "I don't. But sometimes doing the uncomfortable thing is better than doing nothing at all." He extended his hand. One dance. Something in his expression and understanding of what it cost her to be here made Lillian place her hand in his. One dance. His hand was warm and calloused as it closed gently around hers, leading her back toward the celebration. Heads turned as they approached the dancing area. Barnett Caldwell dancing was apparently an unusual sight. The music was a simple reel, and Lillian found herself swept into the pattern of steps with Caldwell's hand at her waist guiding her surely. He moved with unexpected grace for such a large man, and she noted that he kept them toward the edge of the dancing area, away from the densest part of the crowd. "Everyone is watching," she murmured, uncomfortable with the attention. "Let them. They've had little enough to gossip about lately." His eyes held a hint of amusement. "Besides, it's my party." As they turned through the figures of the dance, Lillian found herself relaxing slightly. There was something steadying about Barnett Caldwell, a solid presence that seemed to create a buffer between her and the overwhelming aspects of the gathering. When the music ended, he led her toward the refreshment tables. "Lemonade." "Yes, thank you." He procured 2 glasses and guided her to a relatively quiet spot beneath a large oak tree. Several people approached to greet their host, and Lillian observed how he handled each interaction, polite but reserved, generous with thanks for their attendance but maintaining a certain distance. "You do this every year?" she asked when they were momentarily alone again. Elizabeth started it. He spoke his wife's name more easily now. She believed in building community, in celebrating the good things even when times were hard. After she died. He paused, looking out over the gathering. Continuing, it seemed the right thing to do, even when it was the last thing I wanted. Lillian understood completely. How many times in Boston had she forced herself through motions that felt empty but necessary? "It gets easier," he added, as if reading her thoughts. "Not the missing them part. That never changes, but the living alongside it that gets more manageable." She looked up at him sharply. "I never said I lost someone." His eyes, when they met hers, held no pity, only recognition. "You didn't have to. I recognize the look." Before she could respond, Dr. Wilson approached them, smiling broadly. "Miss Evans, I'm glad you decided to attend, and Caldwell, the celebration is magnificent as always." "Wilson." Caldwell nodded respectfully. "How's the Matthews baby? Thriving, thanks to Miss Evans's assistance. She has a remarkable touch with infants." The doctor beamed proudly at Lillian. "Fort Worth is fortunate to have acquired such skilled nursing." "Indeed." Caldwell's gaze lingered on her face. "If you'll excuse me, I should check on the barbecue. Enjoy the celebration, Miss Evans." As he strode away, Dr. Wilson raised an eyebrow. "I've never seen Barnett Caldwell spend so much time with anyone at one of these gatherings. Usually he makes a brief appearance, ensures everything is running smoothly, and retreats to his study." Lillian sipped her lemonade, unsure how to respond. He was being polite to a newcomer. The doctor didn't sound convinced. "Well, I'm glad you came. It's important to build connections here if you plan to stay." "I do plan to stay," she said with more certainty than she'd felt before. Something about Fort Worth was beginning to feel right, despite everything. The remainder of the afternoon passed pleasantly. Lillian found herself drawn into conversations with townsfolk who seemed genuinely interested in the new nurse from Boston, though she carefully steered discussions away from her past. She saw Barnett Caldwell occasionally, moving among his guests, but their paths didn't cross again until twilight began to fall. Lanterns were being lit around the property, casting a warm glow over the continuing festivities when he appeared beside her once more. "Would you like to see the house?" he asked quietly, catching her by surprise. "Most of the guests never venture inside, but I thought you might appreciate the library." The invitation felt significant, somehow more personal than their dance or conversation. "Are you certain?" "I wouldn't have offered otherwise, Miss Evans." She nodded, and he led her away from the crowd toward the impressive white house that commanded the hilltop. Up close, it was even more striking: 2 stories of solid construction with a wide veranda wrapping around 3 sides, climbing roses framing tall windows. The interior was elegant but masculine: dark woods, comfortable furniture, landscape paintings on the walls. Caldwell led her through the entrance hall to a room at the rear of the house where floor-to-ceiling shelves lined 3 walls, filled with books. "Oh!" The exclamation escaped before she could prevent it. After 2 weeks in Fort Worth, the sight of so many books was like encountering an old friend. "Elizabeth loved reading," Caldwell explained, lighting an oil lamp that cast a golden glow across the room. "She brought most of these from Philadelphia when we married. I've added to the collection since." Lillian moved to the nearest shelf, running her fingers lightly over the spines. "Dickens, Austen, Thoreau, these are wonderful. You're welcome to borrow any that interest you." She turned to him in surprise. "That's very generous. Books should be read, not just displayed." He moved to a cabinet and withdrew a decanter. "May I offer you a small brandy? The evenings still carry a chill." She hesitated, then nodded. "A small one, thank you." He poured 2 glasses and handed one to her, then gestured toward 2 leather chairs positioned near the window that overlooked the back of the property. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the distant sounds of the celebration filtering through the house. "Did you always want to be a nurse?" Caldwell finally asked. The question was innocent enough, but Lillian felt the familiar tightening in her chest that accompanied any discussion of her past. "My mother was ill for many years before she died. I learned to care for her, and it seemed natural to continue helping others." "That doesn't quite answer the question," he observed. She met his gaze directly. "No, it doesn't." Instead of pressing further, he surprised her by changing direction. "I never planned to be a rancher. My father was a lawyer in Virginia. I was expected to follow him into the profession." "What changed your mind?" "The war." His expression darkened momentarily. "After Gettysburg, I couldn't imagine returning to debate legal technicalities in a courtroom. Needed open sky and honest work." Lillian understood the impulse to seek something fundamentally different after tragedy. "And you found that here?" "Eventually." He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "Took some wandering first. Texas wasn't my first stop, but it was the one that felt right." "How did you know?" The question emerged more urgently than she'd intended. "How did you know this was where you should stay?" Caldwell considered this thoughtfully. "I woke up one morning and realized I was thinking about the future instead of the past. Not all the time, but enough to notice the difference." He looked at her directly. "You'll know when it happens for you, Miss Evans." The perceptiveness of this observation unsettled her. She rose and moved to the bookshelves again, needing distance from those 2 discerning blue eyes. "You can call me Lillian," she said quietly, her back to him. "If we're to be friends." She heard him set down his glass and stand, his footsteps soft on the carpet as he moved to join her. "Barnett, then, or Barn, as most folks around here call me." When she turned, he was closer than she'd expected, tall and solid in the lamplight. Something shifted in the air between them, a recognition, a possibility. "I should return to the others," she said, suddenly conscious of their isolation. "Miss Perkins and Miss Simmons will be wondering where I've gone." He stepped back immediately, respecting her withdrawal. "Of course. I'll walk you back." As they returned to the gathering, now illuminated by lanterns and a large bonfire, Lillian was acutely aware of Barnett's presence beside her. Something had changed in that quiet library, a door had opened between them that she wasn't certain she was ready to step through. "There you are." Miss Simmons hurried toward them. "We've been looking everywhere. Mr. Jenkins wants to head back to town soon before it gets too dark." "I was showing Miss Evans the library," Barnett explained smoothly. "She has an appreciation for books." Miss Simmons's eyes widened slightly at this information, darting between them with sudden interest. "Oh, well, how nice. I should collect my things," Lillian said, sensing the younger woman's curiosity. "Thank you for the tour, Mr. Caldwell, and for the invitation today." "The pleasure was mine, Miss Evans." His formality returned in the presence of others, but his eyes held the same warmth she'd glimpsed in the library. "Safe journey back to town." The wagon ride back to Fort Worth was filled with cheerful chatter as the others discussed the celebration, but Lillian remained quiet, lost in thought. She hadn't expected to find someone in Texas who might understand the shadows she carried, certainly not in the form of a taciturn rancher with his own painful past. Most unsettling was the realization that Barnett Caldwell had seen through her careful facade with apparent ease, recognizing in her what others missed or chose to ignore. The question now was whether that recognition represented a threat to the new beginning she sought, or, perhaps, an unexpected opportunity to truly heal. 4 days later, Barnett Caldwell returned to have his stitches removed. It was late afternoon, and the doctor's office was quiet after a busy morning. Lillian had just finished cleaning instruments when the bell jangled and he stepped inside, ducking his head slightly under the doorframe. "Miss Evans." He removed his hat, revealing hair still damp from what must have been a hasty washing. "I hope I'm not too late." "Not at all." She gestured to the examination room. "Please have a seat. Dr. Wilson has gone to check on Mrs. Peterson's new baby, but I can remove those stitches for you." He followed her, his presence seeming to fill the small room as he settled onto the chair. Lillian gathered her instruments, conscious of his eyes following her movements. "How have you been since the celebration?" he asked as she unwrapped his bandage. "Well, thank you." She examined the wound, pleased with the healing. "And you, busy? Spring brings calving season." She nodded, carefully snipping the first stitch. "This looks good. You'll have a scar, but the function should be normal." They fell into silence as she worked methodically, removing each stitch with gentle precision. His skin was warm beneath her fingers, and she noted how he remained perfectly still, making her task easier. "I brought something for you," he said, as she removed the last stitch. Reaching into his pocket with his good hand, he withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "A thank you for your care." Surprised, Lillian accepted the package. "That's not necessary, Mr. Caldwell Barnett. I was simply doing my job. Open it anyway." She unwrapped the paper to reveal a small leather-bound volume of poetry, Wordsworth's collected works. The book was clearly not new but had been well cared for, its pages slightly yellowed with age. "I noticed you admiring it in the library," he explained. "Elizabeth marked her favorite passages. I thought you might enjoy seeing which one spoke to her." The thoughtfulness of the gesture caught Lillian completely off guard. She opened the book carefully, noting the neat feminine handwriting in the margins, small stars beside certain stanzas. "This is..." She struggled to find words. "This is very kind, but I can't accept something so personal." "You can." His voice was gentle but firm. "Books need readers, and Elizabeth would have wanted it to be appreciated rather than sitting on a shelf gathering dust." Lillian looked up at him, seeing the resolved expression in his eyes. "Thank you, I'll take good care of it." "I know you will." He stood, flexing his arm experimentally. Good as new thanks to your skills. Keep it clean for another few days, she advised professionally, regaining her composure. And try not to overuse it immediately. He smiled a real smile this time, not the half version she'd glimpsed before. It transformed his face, softening the lines around his eyes and revealing a glimpse of the man he might have been before grief hardened him. "Would you have dinner with me, Lillian?" he asked suddenly. "Not at the hotel restaurant where everyone would be watching and whispering, but at my ranch. My housekeeper, Mrs. Mendez, is an excellent cook." The invitation startled her. "That would be inappropriate," he supplied when she hesitated. "Perhaps by Boston standards. But this is Texas, and I'm simply asking to share a meal and conversation in a setting where neither of us has to maintain appearances." Put that way, it was exactly what she wanted, a respite from the constant vigilance of being the new nurse in town, always conscious of how her behavior might be interpreted. "Yes," she found herself saying, "I would like that. But how would I get there and back? It's quite a distance." "I'll send my foreman, Jackson, with the buggy on your next half-day. Would Wednesday suit?" Wednesday was indeed her afternoon off. "That would be fine, thank you." His smile returned, warming his eyes. "Until Wednesday, then." After he left, Lillian sat for a long moment with the book of poetry in her hands, running her fingers over the embossed leather. The gift represented something significant, Barnett sharing a piece of his past, of Elizabeth, with her. It wasn't done lightly, she sensed. That evening in her room, she read by lamplight, discovering Elizabeth Caldwell through the passages she'd marked, verses about nature's beauty, about resilience, about finding joy in small moments. The woman who had loved these poems must have been thoughtful, observant, perhaps a bit romantic. Lillian found herself wishing they could have met, then caught herself in the strangeness of that thought. When Wednesday arrived, Lillian felt unaccountably nervous as she dressed in her best day dress, a soft blue that complemented her fair coloring. Mrs. Holliday raised an eyebrow when Lillian mentioned she'd been invited to Caldwell Ranch for dinner. "Well, that's unexpected," the landlady commented. "Barnett Caldwell hasn't issued a private dinner invitation to anyone in town since Elizabeth passed, as far as I know." This information did nothing to calm Lillian's nerves. "It's merely a thank you for treating his injury." Mrs. Holliday's expression suggested she wasn't convinced. "Just be careful, dear. Not of Caldwell, he's honorable to a fault, but of your own heart. A man who's lost what he has doesn't easily open himself to that possibility again." "It's only dinner," Lillian insisted, though she understood the warning. True to his word, Barnett sent his foreman with a smart buggy precisely at 2 o'clock. Jackson was a weathered man of about 50 with kind eyes and a courteous manner. He helped Lillian into the buggy with a tip of his hat. "Mr. Caldwell speaks highly of your medical skills, Miss Evans," he commented as they set off. "That arm of his was in a bad way when we finally convinced him to see the doctor." "He seems reluctant to seek medical attention," Lillian observed. Jackson chuckled. "That's putting it mildly, madam. Man would have to be half dead before admitting he needed help." He glanced at her. "Though he didn't argue much when I suggested it was time to get those stitches out." The journey to Caldwell Ranch passed pleasantly, with Jackson pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area's history. Lillian found herself relaxing in the warm spring afternoon, the Texas landscape beginning to feel less foreign with each passing day. As they approached the ranch, she viewed it with fresh eyes, noting details she'd missed during the crowded celebration. The main house stood proud against the blue sky, but she also observed the well-maintained outbuildings, the carefully constructed corrals, the vegetable garden flourishing behind the house. Everything spoke of attention to detail and pride in workmanship. Barnett was waiting on the veranda as they arrived, dressed in clean trousers and a fresh shirt, his hair still damp from washing. He came down the steps to help her from the buggy, his hands strong and sure as they circled her waist. "Welcome back to Caldwell Ranch," he said, setting her gently on the ground. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for the invitation." She was suddenly conscious of his height as he stood close to her, the top of her head barely reaching his shoulder. He offered his arm and led her up the steps. "I thought we might take tea on the veranda before dinner, if that suits you. The view is at its best this time of day." The veranda was comfortably furnished with cushioned chairs and small tables. A tea service had been laid out, along with a plate of fresh biscuits. As Lillian took a seat, she noticed a vase of wildflowers adorning the table, a thoughtful touch that suggested special effort had been made for her visit. "Your home is beautiful," she said as Barnett poured tea. "You've created something remarkable here. It's been a labor of love." He handed her a cup. "Though I can't take all the credit, Elizabeth designed much of the house, and Mrs. Mendez has kept it from becoming a bachelor's disaster since. Since Elizabeth died," he didn't need to say. The unspoken words hung between them. "I've been reading the poetry," Lillian said, changing the subject. "Your wife had excellent taste. I particularly enjoyed her notes on the nature poems." A gentle smile touched his lips. She could spend hours watching a single wildflower or cloud formation. "Said God was in the details if we only took time to notice. A wise perspective. She was a wise woman." He leaned back in his chair, regarding Lillian thoughtfully. "Now tell me something about Boston that you miss." The question caught her off guard, and her first instinct was to deflect. But something in Barnett's direct gaze made her consider an honest answer. "The libraries," she admitted. "The Boston Athenaeum was my sanctuary, rooms and rooms of books, quiet corners to read undisturbed, the smell of leather bindings and paper." "Not the people?" he asked perceptively. She sipped her tea before answering. "There are some I miss, but Boston became difficult for me." To her surprise, he didn't press for details. Instead, he said, "I have more books than just what you saw in the library. The attic is full of crates Elizabeth had shipped from Philadelphia that I never unpacked. Perhaps you'd help me sort through them sometime." The offer touched her deeply, not just access to books, but an invitation to participate in something Barnett had apparently avoided since his wife's death. "I'd like that," she said softly. Their conversation flowed easily as they enjoyed tea and biscuits. Barnett spoke of his ranch operations, the challenges of the cattle business, his plans for expanding into horse breeding. Lillian shared stories of interesting cases from the doctor's office, carefully edited to protect patient privacy, and her observations about Fort Worth's rapid growth. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Mrs. Mendez, a dignified Mexican woman in her 60s, appeared to announce dinner was ready. She greeted Lillian warmly, her dark eyes assessing the visitor with open curiosity. "Miss Evans saved my arm, Mrs. Mendez," Barnett explained with a touch of humor. "So please ensure dinner is worthy of such heroics." The housekeeper smiled knowingly. "I have prepared my special chili Colorado, Mr. Caldwell, and flan for dessert." The dining room continued the home's theme of understated elegance, a large table of polished oak, comfortable chairs, landscape paintings adorning the walls. The table had been set for two at one end, with fine china and crystal that suggested it was used for special occasions rather than daily meals. "You usually dine alone?" Lillian asked as Barnett held her chair. "Most evenings." He took his seat across from her. "Though Jackson and some of the senior hands join me sometimes, especially in winter when the days are short." Mrs. Mendez served a magnificent meal tender beef in a rich, mildly spiced red sauce, beans seasoned perfectly with herbs, fresh tortillas, and a crisp salad from the kitchen garden. Lillian found herself enjoying both the food and the company immensely. "Tell me about your family," Barnett said as they were finishing the main course. "You mentioned your mother was ill. What of your father?" Lillian tensed slightly but managed to keep her expression neutral. "My father was a physician. He died when I was 16, a carriage accident in winter. I'm sorry." His eyes held genuine sympathy. "So you cared for your mother alone after that?" "Yes, she had consumption. It was a long decline." This much was truth, though it omitted crucial details. "That's a heavy burden for a young woman to carry." She shrugged slightly. "Many bear worse." "True, but acknowledging others' suffering doesn't diminish your own." His perception was unsettling. Lillian changed the subject. "How did you meet Elizabeth? Was she from Texas originally?" A small smile played across his features at the memory. "No, Philadelphia born and bred. She came west with her brother after their parents died. He had notions of making a fortune in cattle. Instead, he lost everything in a card game in Dallas and headed to California, leaving Elizabeth to fend for herself. How terrible for her. She didn't see it that way. Said it was the first truly independent decision of her life, choosing to stay in Texas rather than following her brother or returning east." His eyes grew distant with memory. "I met her in Fort Worth. She was working as a teacher and boarding with a minister's family. I was delivering cattle and stopped in town for supplies." "Love at first sight?" Lillian asked with a small smile. He chuckled. "Hardly. She thought I was uncouth and provincial. I thought she was too refined and impractical for frontier life. But she had the most remarkable laugh, unexpected and genuine. I found myself riding into town on increasingly flimsy pretexts just to hear it again." The image of a younger Barnett, already falling in love but not yet realizing it, was endearing. "She clearly changed her mind about you." "Eventually. It took 6 months of courting, 3 rejected proposals, and my agreement to build a proper house before she'd consider marrying me. Said she wouldn't live in a glorified shack like my original cabin." "A woman who knew her worth," Lillian observed. "Indeed." Barnett's expression grew more serious. "She changed everything for me, made me want to build something that would last, something worthy of her faith in me. As Mrs. Mendez cleared their plates and brought dessert, a perfect flan with caramel sauce. Lillian found herself wondering what it would be like to be loved so completely. Her own experience with love had been far different, a painful lesson in misjudgment that still haunted her. "May I ask something personal?" Barnett said after they'd savored the first bites of dessert. She nodded cautiously. "What happened in Boston?" His voice was gentle but direct. "What are you running from, Lillian?" The question, so plainly stated, caused her breath to catch. For a moment, she considered deflecting again, giving the practiced half-truths she'd offered others. But sitting in this quiet dining room with a man who had shared his own pain so openly, the usual evasions felt wrong. "I made a terrible mistake," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I trusted someone I shouldn't have, a doctor at the hospital where I trained, older, respected, charming." Her fingers twisted the napkin in her lap. "We were to be married." Barnett remained silent, giving her space to continue at her own pace. 3 weeks before the wedding, I discovered he'd been. She swallowed hard. He'd been conducting experimental treatments on patients without consent or oversight. Dangerous procedures that had resulted in at least 2 deaths that I could document. "What did you do?" he asked quietly. "What I had to do. I reported him to the hospital board with my evidence." The memory still made her stomach clench. "He denied everything, of course." claimed I was unstable, hysterical, imagining things because of wedding nerves. They believed him. It wasn't a question. He was chief of surgery. I was a nurse who'd been besotted with him. The bitterness crept into her voice despite her best efforts. They suggested I was confused, perhaps even malicious because of some lover's quarrel. They buried my report. And then, one of his experimental cases died, a young mother of 3. I couldn't stay silent. Her eyes met Barnett's, pleading for understanding. I went to a newspaper with what I knew. Brave, he said simply. A humorless laugh escaped her. That's not what most called it. The story caused a scandal, but the hospital closed ranks. They discredited me, suggested I was mentally unstable. My fiancé, Dr. Harrison, used our private conversations against me, twisted things I'd confided to make me seem unbalanced. But the truth came out. Barnett's expression had hardened, his jaw tight with anger on her behalf. Eventually, another doctor came forward with corroborating evidence. There was an official investigation. Dr. Harrison lost his position and his medical license. She looked down at her hands. But by then, the damage to my reputation was done. I was the hysterical woman who had caused a public spectacle, aired the hospital's dirty laundry. Even those who ultimately believed me thought I should have handled it more discreetly. So you came to Texas to start fresh. His voice was gentle again. Yes. Dr. Montgomery, the physician who corroborated my claims, arranged the position with Dr. Wilson. He was one of the few who stood by me through it all. Barnett reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Thank you for telling me. The simple touch and sincere words broke something inside her. Tears she'd held back for months welled in her eyes. I did the right thing. I know I did, but sometimes doing right doesn't feel like a victory, he finished for her. It just feels lonely. She nodded, unable to speak as the tears spilled over. Barnett rose and moved to her side, offering a handkerchief. His hand rested lightly on her shoulder, a steadying presence as she struggled to regain her composure. I'm sorry, she managed finally. This is hardly proper dinner conversation. To hell with proper, he said quietly. You've carried this alone long enough, Lillian. She looked up at him, seeing no judgment in his eyes, only understanding and something else, something that made her heart beat faster. Would you like to walk outside? He suggested. The sunset is spectacular from the west veranda, and the evening air might be welcome. Grateful for his tact, she nodded. He offered his arm and she took it, allowing him to guide her through the house to the veranda that faced the setting sun. The view was indeed magnificent, the sun, a massive golden orb sinking toward the distant horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple. They stood side by side at the railing, watching in companionable silence as the colors deepened and stars began to appear in the eastern sky. The vastness of Texas spread before them, a landscape that dwarfed human concerns, and yet somehow made them more manageable rather than less. I understand now, Barnett said eventually, his voice low. Why you recognized the look in my eyes at the celebration. We've both learned how it feels when the life you thought you were building collapses. Yes, she turned to look at him in the fading light, but you're rebuilding. This ranch, your work, you've created something meaningful. It's taken time, and I'm not finished yet. His eyes held hers steadily. Neither are you, Lillian. Your story isn't over, it's just taking a different path than you expected. The simple truth of this statement touched her deeply. For the first time since the nightmare in Boston began, Lillian felt truly seen and understood, not pitied or judged, but recognized by someone who had walked a similar path. Thank you, she whispered, for listening, for not dismissing what I felt. His hand found hers on the railing, large and warm as it covered her smaller one. No one should have to bear pain alone and unacknowledged. The words hung between them, resonant with shared understanding. In that moment, Lillian felt something shift inside her, a loosening of the tight knot of isolation she'd carried for so long. As darkness settled fully over the ranch, Jackson brought the buggy around for her return to town. Barnett helped her into the seat, his hands lingering slightly at her waist. "I'd like to see you again," he said simply. "Not just at the doctor's office or town gatherings." "I'd like that too," she replied, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "Saturday. I could take you riding, show you more of the ranch." "I haven't ridden in years," she admitted. A smile touched his lips. "I have gentle horses, and I'll keep you safe." Somehow, Lillian knew he meant more than just during a horseback ride. "Saturday, then." As the buggy pulled away, she looked back to see him standing on the veranda, a tall silhouette against the lamplight from within. Something warm unfurled in her chest, not happiness exactly, not yet, but perhaps its precursor, possibility. Back at the boarding house, Miss Perkins and Miss Simmons were full of questions about her evening at Caldwell Ranch, their curiosity barely disguised as casual interest. "Was it just the two of you for dinner?" Miss Simmons asked, wide-eyed. "Mrs. Mendez prepared the meal and served it," Lillian replied evenly. "It was a thank you for medical care, nothing more." "Of course," Miss Perkins said, exchanging a meaningful glance with Miss Simmons that suggested they believed otherwise. Though it's the first time anyone can recall Barnett Caldwell inviting someone to dine privately at the ranch since he was widowed. "He's quite alone out there," Miss Simmons added. "Such a fine man shouldn't remain solitary forever, don't you think?" Lillian managed a noncommittal response and excused herself to her room, where she opened the volume of poetry Barnett had given her. Reading Elizabeth's marked passages by lamplight, she felt an unexpected connection to the woman who had loved these same words, who had loved Barnett Caldwell and built a life with him before tragedy intervened. "I hope you wouldn't mind," she whispered to the absent Elizabeth, running her fingers over the neat annotations. "That he's beginning to live again." The words felt right somehow, as if acknowledging Elizabeth's place in Barnett's heart wasn't diminishing any new feelings but honoring what had come before. In the days that followed, Lillian found herself watching the clock on Saturday morning, anticipation building as she completed her half-day of work at Dr. Wilson's office. The doctor had noticed her distraction with amusement. "I understand Caldwell is taking you riding today," he commented as they finished treating a child with a sprained ankle. Lillian looked up in surprise. "News travels quickly in Fort Worth." "Small towns have few secrets," he agreed cheerfully. "For what it's worth, I think it's a good development. Barnett Caldwell has been alone too long, and you've brought a light back to his eyes that's been missing for years." "We're just friends," she protested weakly. "For now, perhaps." The doctor patted her shoulder. "But friendship built on mutual understanding is the best foundation for something more. Now off you go. I can manage the afternoon patients." Barnett arrived precisely at noon, driving a smart buggy himself rather than sending Jackson. He wore casual riding clothes and a clean Stetson, looking more relaxed than Lillian had yet seen him. The sight of him waiting outside the doctor's office sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "Ready for your riding lesson?" he asked as he helped her into the buggy. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, suddenly nervous about the prospect. He smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "Don't worry. I've selected our gentlest mare for you. Daisy wouldn't spook if a cannon went off beside her." The ride to the ranch passed quickly with easy conversation. Lillian found herself relaxing in Barnett's company. no longer feeling the need to guard every word and expression as she did with others in town. He possessed a dry humor she hadn't initially perceived, and his observations about the people and landscape of Texas revealed a thoughtful mind behind his reserved exterior. At the ranch, Mrs. Mendez had prepared a picnic basket for them, and Barnett led Lillian to the stables where 2 horses waited, a placid-looking dun mare and a larger bay gelding. "This is Daisy," he introduced, running a hand along the mare's neck. "She's been with us for 12 years and knows every inch of this ranch. You couldn't ask for a safer mount." True to his word, Daisy proved to be incredibly patient as Lillian reacquainted herself with the basics of riding. Barnett was an excellent teacher, clear in his instructions, patient with her hesitations, encouraging without being condescending. Once she felt comfortable at a walk, they set out across the ranch with the picnic basket secured behind Barnett's saddle. He led them along gentle trails, pointing out features of the property and sharing stories of how he'd acquired different parcels over the years. Lillian gradually relaxed into the rhythm of riding, enjoying the new perspective on the Texas landscape. They stopped for their picnic in a lovely spot beside a small stream where cottonwood trees provided dappled shade. Barnett spread a blanket and unpacked Mrs. Mendez's provisions: cold chicken, fresh bread, cheese, fruit, and a jug of lemonade. "You seem more at ease today," he observed as they enjoyed the simple but delicious food. "I am," she smiled, realizing it was true. "I haven't felt this unguarded in a very long time." "That's what Texas can do for you," he said, leaning back against a tree trunk. "There's something about this much open space that puts things in perspective." "It's not just Texas," Lillian admitted softly. "It's you. You make me feel understood without having to explain everything." His eyes met hers, intense and warm. "Perhaps because we're both familiar with the landscape of loss, even if the territories are different." "Yes." She held his gaze, no longer afraid of what he might see in hers. "Though I think your loss was far greater than mine. Pain isn't a competition, Lillian. What you experienced, the betrayal, the public humiliation, the questioning of your judgment and character, those are genuine losses. Different from mine, but no less real." The simple validation in his words unlocked something inside her. For months, she'd told herself that her suffering was insignificant compared to others, that she had no right to feel so deeply wounded when she still had her health, her skills, her future. Barnett's acknowledgement that her pain mattered was like cool water on parched earth. "Thank you," she whispered. He reached across the picnic blanket and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "You don't need to thank me for seeing what's plainly there. The people in Boston who dismissed your suffering were wrong." They sat in companionable silence for a while, hands still joined, listening to the gentle gurgle of the stream and the rustle of cottonwood leaves above them. The moment felt suspended in time, peaceful in a way Lillian had forgotten was possible. Eventually, they packed up the remains of their picnic and continued their ride. Barnett showed her the furthest boundaries of his property, where the land rose slightly to provide a panoramic view of the surrounding countryside. In the distance, Fort Worth was just visible, a cluster of buildings beside the silver ribbon of the Trinity River. "It's beautiful," Lillian said, taking in the vastness of the landscape. "So different from the city." "It grows on you," Barnett agreed. "I can't imagine living anywhere else now." As they rode back toward the ranch house, Lillian found herself watching Barnett, the confident way he sat in the saddle, the gentle handling of his horse, the occasional smile that softened his features when he pointed out something he particularly loved about his land. She realized with a start that she was beginning to care for this man in a way that went beyond friendship or shared understanding. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. After what had happened with Dr. Harrison, she had convinced herself she would never trust her heart to anyone again. Yet here she was, feeling the first tendrils of something new taking root. Back at the stables, Barnett helped her dismount, his hand strong at her waist as he lifted her down. For a moment, they stood close together, his hands lingering as their eyes met. "Thank you for today," she said softly. "I've enjoyed it more than I can express, as have I." His voice was deeper than usual. "Lillian," whatever he had been about to say was interrupted by the arrival of Jackson, riding hard into the yard. "Boss," the foreman called urgently, "trouble at the north pasture. That new bull broke through the fence and has the yearlings scattered halfway to the river." Barnett's expression shifted immediately to concern. "Anyone hurt?" "Not yet, but it's a mess. We need all hands." He turned back to Lillian, clearly torn. "I'm sorry, go," she said immediately. "I understand completely. Mrs. Mendez can prepare some tea while I arrange for someone to take you back to town. There's no need to rush. I can wait until you've resolved the situation." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you for understanding. Ranch emergencies wait for no man or woman." With that, he squeezed her hand once and strode off with Jackson, already discussing strategy for containing the escaped bull and gathering the scattered cattle. Mrs. Mendez welcomed Lillian warmly, insisting on serving tea and cakes in the library where she could be comfortable. "Mr. Caldwell will be very disappointed that your day was interrupted," the housekeeper commented as she poured. "He has been looking forward to this visit all week." "Has he?" The thought warmed Lillian unexpectedly. "Oh yes, it has been a long time since I've seen him alive." Mrs. Mendez studied Lillian with wise, assessing eyes. "You are good for him, Miss Evans." "We're just friends," Lillian said automatically. The older woman smiled knowingly. "For now, perhaps, but I have known Mr. Caldwell since he first came to Texas. I see how he looks at you." Rather than feeling uncomfortable under this scrutiny, Lillian found herself curious. "You've been with him a long time." "Since before he built this house. I was cook at a boarding house in Fort Worth when he first arrived, thin as a rail and serious as a judge." She smiled at the memory. "When he bought his first small parcel of land, he hired my husband as his foreman and asked if I would keep house for him. We've been here ever since." "So you knew Elizabeth?" "Yes." Mrs. Mendez's expression softened. "She was sunshine in human form, always laughing, always planning something new. She made this house a home." She glanced around the library. "After she died, Mr. Caldwell kept everything exactly as she had arranged it. For years, he wouldn't change a single thing. Only recently has he begun to make small adjustments, a new chair here, moving a painting there." "Moving forward," Lillian murmured. "Exactly." The housekeeper nodded approvingly. "And since he met you, Miss Evans, the changes have accelerated. Last week he asked me to open the music room that has been closed since Miss Elizabeth passed." Lillian absorbed this information thoughtfully. "Mrs. Mendez, may I ask you something?" "Of course." "You think Elizabeth would mind that he's beginning to live again?" The older woman's eyes filled with unexpected tears. "Oh, my dear. Miss Elizabeth made me promise on her deathbed that I would make sure he didn't lock his heart away forever. She knew him so well, knew he would try to honor her memory by never loving again. That's not honor, she told me. That's fear disguised as loyalty." These words from beyond the grave struck Lillian deeply. She thought of the poetry book with its careful annotations, evidence of a woman who had embraced life fully and would want the same for those she loved. "Thank you for telling me that," she said softly. Mrs. Mendez patted her hand. "Miss Elizabeth would have liked you, Miss Evans. You have strength inside you, just as she did." The housekeeper left Lillian to enjoy her tea in the library. Alone, she browsed the shelves, finding comfort in the familiar sight of books arranged with care. Eventually, she settled in a chair by the window with a volume of Emerson's essays, losing herself in the words as afternoon light slanted through the glass. She must have dozed off because she awakened to the sound of the library door opening. Barnett stood there, looking tired and disheveled but smiling at the sight of her curled in the chair with the book on her lap. "I'm sorry," she said, sitting up straighter. "I didn't mean to fall asleep. Don't apologize. I'm just sorry to have abandoned you for so long." He moved into the room, running a hand through his hair. "The bull is contained, the yearlings recovered, and only minor fence damage to show for all the excitement. I'm glad no one was hurt. As am I." He sank into the chair opposite hers with a weary sigh. "Not quite the day I had planned for us." "It was perfect nonetheless," she assured him. "The riding, the picnic, seeing your land. I've enjoyed every moment." His eyes, tired as they were, warmed at her words. "Even the part where I abandoned you for 3 hours to chase stubborn cattle." "Even that. Mrs. Mendez has been wonderful company and your library is a treasure." He glanced at the book in her lap. "Emerson. Elizabeth loved his writing as well. She had excellent taste." Lillian hesitated, then added softly, "Mrs. Mendez told me a little about her." Barnett's expression grew thoughtful. "Did she? That's good. Elizabeth deserves to be remembered and spoken of." "She said Elizabeth made you promise not to lock your heart away forever." The directness of the statement clearly surprised him, but after a moment he nodded. "Those were almost her exact words. 'Don't you dare use loving me as an excuse not to live fully.' Barnett Caldwell, she was formidable when she wanted to be." "She sounds remarkable." "She was." His eyes held Lillian steadily. "And she would appreciate your understanding that loving her is part of who I am, not something to be erased or replaced." "Of course." Lillian set the book aside. "The people we've loved, whether they're gone or simply part of our past, shape us. We carry them with us." Barnett leaned forward, his expression intent. "Lillian, I need to tell you something." Her heart quickened at his tone. "Yes. These past weeks, knowing you, spending time with you, it's awakened something I thought was gone forever." He spoke carefully, choosing each word. "I'm not the same man I was before Elizabeth died, and I never will be, but I find myself looking forward again, planning for more than just the next day or season." "I understand," she said softly. "I feel something similar." "Do you?" Hope flared in his eyes. "Yes. After what happened in Boston, I convinced myself that my judgment couldn't be trusted, that I was safer keeping everyone at a distance." She met his gaze directly. "But you've made me question that choice." He reached across the space between them, offering his hand. She placed hers in it without hesitation, feeling the strength and warmth of his fingers as they closed around hers. "I don't want to rush this," he said earnestly. "Whatever is growing between us deserves time and care, but I want you to know that my intentions are serious, Lillian. You're not a diversion or a consolation." The simple honesty of his declaration touched her deeply. "Thank you for that. I need time as well, but I'm no longer afraid of the possibility." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise after a long night, gradual, warming, transformative. They sat together in the fading afternoon light, hands joined across the space between them. Two people who had weathered separate storms beginning to glimpse a shared horizon. As spring gave way to the heat of Texas summer, Lillian and Barnett's relationship deepened gradually. He came to town more frequently, often timing his visits to coincide with the end of her workday, so they could share a walk or a cup of coffee at the hotel restaurant. On her half-days, Jackson would arrive with the buggy to bring her to the ranch, where she and Barnett would ride, read together in the library, or simply talk on the veranda as evening approached, Fort Worth noticed, of course. A town that size couldn't help but observe the growing connection between the widowed rancher and the nurse from Boston. But to Lillian's surprise, the attention wasn't uncomfortable. There was a general sense of approval, even encouragement, from the townspeople who had worried about Barnett's solitary existence for years. Dr. Wilson was particularly supportive. "I've known Caldwell since I came to Fort Worth 8 years ago," he told Lillian one quiet afternoon at the office. "Never seen him as engaged with life as he's been these past months. You've been good medicine for him, Miss Evans." "He's been the same for me," she admitted. "I came here thinking I would simply work and exist, not expecting to find connection." The doctor nodded knowingly. "Sometimes healing comes from unexpected sources." In late June, Barnett invited Lillian to accompany him to Fort Worth's Independence Day celebration. It would be their first formal public appearance together, and the invitation carried significance they both recognized. "People will talk," she warned him as they sat on the ranch veranda discussing the event. "People already talk," he replied with a smile. "At least this will give them something new to discuss over their Sunday dinners." The 4th of July arrived with perfect weather, clear blue skies and temperatures mild enough for comfort, despite the summer season. Barnett collected Lillian from the boarding house in his best buggy, dressed more formally than she had yet seen him in a crisp suit and polished boots. "You look beautiful," he said as she descended the steps in her best dress, a deep blue with delicate white trim that complemented her fair coloring. "Thank you," she replied, accepting his hand into the buggy. "You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Caldwell." His smile was warm as he settled beside her. "Only for special occasions." The town square had been transformed for the celebration. Bunting and flags adorned the buildings. Booths offered games and refreshments, and a bandstand had been erected for dancing later in the evening. It seemed all of Fort Worth and the surrounding ranches had turned out, creating a festive atmosphere of community and patriotic pride. As they moved through the crowd, Lillian was acutely aware of the glances and whispers that followed them. But Barnett's hand at the small of her back was steady and reassuring, and the greetings they received were uniformly warm. "Caldwell, about time you escorted a lady to one of these gatherings," called Mr. Peterson, the hardware store owner, with a friendly clap on Barnett's shoulder. "Miss Evans, you've done wonders for old Barn here," added his wife with an approving smile. "Haven't seen him at a town social in ages, unless you count that spring cattle drive celebration he feels obligated to host." Barnett accepted these comments with good-natured patience, never leaving Lillian's side as they participated in the day's activities, watching the children's foot races, applauding the marching band, enjoying ice cream from the church ladies' booth. As afternoon shifted toward evening and lanterns were lit around the square, the band began playing dancing tunes. Couples moved onto the wooden platform that served as a dance floor, and Barnett turned to Lillian with a questioning look. "Would you do me the honor?" he asked formally, extending his hand. "I'd be delighted," she replied, placing her hand in his. The music was a waltz, stately and graceful. Barnett led her onto the floor and into his arms with confident ease. His hand at her waist was proper but possessive, and as they moved together in perfect rhythm, Lillian felt a sense of rightness that transcended the curious gazes of the townsfolk. "Everyone is watching," she murmured, though she found she didn't mind as much as she had anticipated. "Let them," he replied softly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm only seeing you." The simple statement sent warmth coursing through her. As they turned through the figures of the dance, the rest of the world seemed to recede until there was only the music, the warm summer evening, and Barnett's blue eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her heart race. When the music ended, They remained for a moment in the dancing position, reluctant to break the connection. Finally, Barnett stepped back, but kept her hand in his as he led her toward a quieter corner of the square. "Lillian," he said when they had found a relatively private spot beneath an oak tree, "there's something I need to ask you." The seriousness of his tone made her pulse quicken. "Yes, these past months have been the happiest I've known in years. Being with you has reminded me what it means to truly live, not just exist." He took both her hands in his expression earnest in the lamplight. "I find myself thinking of the future again, planning, hoping, dreaming, and in every one of those thoughts you're there beside me, Barnett." She whispered, emotion tightening her throat. "I'm not asking for everything at once," he continued gently. "I know we both carry pasts that have shaped us, but I am asking if you might consider a future where we face whatever comes next together. Are you proposing?" She asked, needing clarity despite the pounding of her heart. "I'm proposing that we acknowledge what's growing between us isn't casual or temporary." His thumbs traced circles on the backs of her hands. "I'm in love with you, Lillian Evans. I think I have been since you stood in Wilson's office and told me in no uncertain terms that I needed to take better care of myself." The declaration, so simply stated yet profound in its implications, brought tears to her eyes. For months, she had been healing from the wounds of Boston, gradually learning to trust her judgment again, to believe in possibilities beyond mere survival. "I love you too," she admitted, the words both terrifying and freeing as they left her lips. "I wasn't looking for this thought, I didn't want it, but you've shown me that the heart doesn't always follow our plans." The smile that transformed his face was like nothing she'd seen before, pure joy lighting his features as he drew her closer. "May I kiss you, Lillian Evans?" "Yes," she breathed, tilting her face up to his. His lips met hers gently at first, then with increasing confidence as she responded. In that moment, with fireworks beginning to burst overhead and the distant cheers of the townspeople providing an unlikely soundtrack, Lillian felt the last walls around her heart crumble away. When they finally parted, Barnett kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. "I don't want to rush you," he murmured. "We can take this as slowly as you need." "I don't want to waste time either," she replied honestly. "We've both learned how precious life is, how quickly it can change." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Then may I court you properly, with the intention of making you my wife when you're ready?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I would like that very much." As summer progressed into early fall, Lillian and Barnett's courtship became the talk of Fort Worth, a romance that gave the town something hopeful to discuss amid the usual concerns of cattle prices and railroad schedules. They were seen together at church, at town gatherings, riding in the countryside on pleasant evenings. Barnett came to town more frequently, and Lillian spent more weekends at the ranch, always with Mrs. Mendez's proper chaperoning, but with increasing comfort in what was beginning to feel like a second home. In late September, on a perfect autumn afternoon, Barnett took Lillian riding to a special spot on his property, a gentle hill overlooking the Trinity River, where wildflowers still bloomed in defiance of the approaching winter. They dismounted and spread a blanket beneath an oak tree whose leaves were just beginning to turn golden. "I want to show you something," Barnett said, reaching into his saddlebag. He withdrew a rolled document tied with a ribbon and handed it to her. Curious, Lillian untied the ribbon and unrolled what appeared to be architectural drawings. They showed a house, a beautiful two-story structure with wide verandas, large windows, and gracious proportions. "What is this?" she asked, though something in her heart already knew. "Plans for our home," he said quietly, "if you'll have me." She looked up at him, seeing the love and hope in his eyes. "The main house is yours," she said carefully. "Yours and Elizabeth's. I wouldn't want to. The main house is part of my past," he interrupted gently. "Important, precious, but past nonetheless. This," he touched the drawings, "would be our beginning. On the eastern ridge where the sunrise is most beautiful, where we can see the future unfolding before us each morning." The thoughtfulness of the gesture moved her deeply. He wasn't asking her to replace what had been, but to help create something new. "It's beautiful," she whispered, tracing the lines with her finger. "You've put so much thought into this." "I've had the architect incorporate elements. I've noticed you admire the large library with window seats, the wraparound porch where we can watch the sunset, the spacious kitchen since you enjoy baking." He pointed to different features as he spoke. "And there's room for a medical office if you wish to continue nursing, or simply space for whatever dreams we decide to pursue." Lillian studied the plans with growing emotion, seeing in them not just a house but a vision of a shared life, one that honored who they both were while creating space for who they might become together. "And here," Barnett continued, turning to the final page, "a nursery. Because I hope, someday, when you're ready, we might fill our home with children." The simple statement acknowledging both his hope and her agency in the decision was the final key that unlocked her heart completely. Setting the plans carefully aside, Lillian reached for him, drawing his face to hers for a kiss that conveyed everything words could not. When they finally parted, she whispered against his lips, "Ask me now, Barnett. I'm ready." Understanding immediately, he took her hands and looked into her eyes with solemn joy. "Lillian Evans, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me, share my days and nights, face whatever comes with me at your side?" "Yes," she said simply, her heart too full for elaborate declarations. "With all my heart, yes." 2 months later, on a crisp November morning with the first hint of winter in the air, Lillian stood in the small room at the back of Fort Worth's Methodist Church, preparing for her wedding. Miss Perkins and Miss Simmons fussed with her veil while Mrs. Holliday watched with misty eyes. "You look beautiful, dear," the landlady said, adjusting a fold of Lillian's cream-colored silk dress. "Absolutely radiant. Thank you." Lillian smiled at the woman who had become a surrogate mother during her time in Fort Worth. "For everything, not just today, but for welcoming me when I first arrived." Mrs. Holliday patted her cheek affectionately. "You've brought as much to this town as it's given you, especially to that rancher of yours. I haven't seen Barnett Caldwell this happy in years." A knock at the door revealed Dr. Wilson, handsome in his best suit. He had agreed to escort Lillian down the aisle in the absence of any family. "It's time," he said, offering his arm. "And may I say, you're the loveliest bride Fort Worth has seen in many a year." The church was filled with townspeople and ranch hands. All turned to watch as Lillian walked slowly down the aisle toward Barnett, who stood tall and proud at the altar. His face, when he saw her, the naked emotion, the love shining in his eyes, was something she knew she would remember all her days. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They exchanged traditional vows in clear, steady voices, promising to love and honor each other through all of life's joys and sorrows. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Barnett's kiss was tender yet possessive, a promise of the life they would build together. The celebration afterward at Caldwell Ranch was joyous, tables set up on the lawn, lanterns hanging from trees, music and dancing continuing well into the evening. As the party reached its height, Barnett led Lillian away from the crowd toward the eastern ridge of the property. "I wanted to show you," he said, pointing to where construction had begun on their new home. The foundation was complete, and the framing was beginning to take shape against the darkening sky. "It should be finished by spring." Lillian leaned into his embrace, gazing at the beginnings of their future home. "It's going to be beautiful." "Yes." His arms tightened around her, "but not as beautiful as watching you make it a home." She turned in his arms to face him. "I never thought I could be this happy again. After Boston, I believed that part of my life was over. And I thought the same after Elizabeth died." He brushed a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. "We were both wrong, it seems." "Wonderfully wrong," she agreed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. As they stood together on the ridge that would soon hold their home, the stars emerging overhead and the sounds of celebration floating up from below, Lillian felt a sense of completion she had never expected to find. The pain she had carried from Boston hadn't disappeared. It had been transformed through Barnett's understanding and love into something she could carry without being defined by it. "Mrs. Caldwell," Barnett murmured against her hair. "My wife. My heart." "My husband," she replied, the words still new and precious on her tongue. "My future." Hand in hand, they turned back toward their wedding celebration, walking together into the life they would build one day, one choice, one moment of understanding at a time. Epilogue. 5 years later, the spring morning dawned clear and warm as Lillian stood on the porch of their home, watching Barnett teaching their 3-year-old son, Thomas, to ride his first pony. The boy's delighted giggles carried across the yard as his father led the gentle animal in a small circle, one hand steadying Thomas in the saddle. "Mama, look," Thomas called, waving with more enthusiasm than balance. "I'm riding." "I see you, darling," she called back. "You're doing wonderfully." From the cradle beside her rocking chair, 6-month-old Elizabeth made a soft cooing sound, reaching up with tiny fingers toward her mother. Lillian lifted the baby, cradling her against her shoulder as she continued watching her husband and son. The past 5 years had brought more joy than she had ever thought possible. Their beautiful home completed, as promised by spring following their wedding. Thomas's birth, 2 years later, and now little Elizabeth completing their family. The pain of Boston had receded to a distant memory, occasionally remembered but no longer defining. Barnett looked up, catching sight of her with the baby on the porch. The smile that spread across his face, still capable of making her heart quicken after 5 years of marriage, was full of love and contentment. He said something to Thomas, then lifted the boy from the pony and set him on his shoulders for the walk back to the house. "Mama, did you see me?" "I rode all by myself," Thomas exclaimed as they reached the porch steps. "You were very brave," Lillian assured him, bending to kiss his cheek as Barnett set him down. "A true cowboy, just like your father." "Can I show Mrs. Mendez?" the boy asked, already heading for the door. "Walk, don't run," Barnett called after him, then turned to Lillian with a smile. "He's fearless, that one." "Like his father," she replied, shifting little Elizabeth to a more comfortable position. Barnett stepped closer, wrapping his arm around her waist and dropping a kiss on the top of the baby's head before claiming his wife's lips briefly. "Happy?" he asked, though he knew the answer. "Completely." She leaned into his solid strength. "This life we've built, it's more than I ever dreamed possible when I stepped off that stagecoach 5 years ago." He nodded, understanding as always. "For me as well. You brought light back when I thought the darkness was permanent." They stood together on the porch of the home they had created, their children safe within its walls, the future stretching before them bright with possibility. The ranch flourished under Barnett's careful management, and Lillian still assisted Dr. Wilson 2 days a week, her medical skills respected throughout the county. Fort Worth had become truly home, a place where her past was acknowledged, but did not define her, where she had found not just love but understanding, not just acceptance but genuine appreciation for who she was. "I was thinking," Barnett said as they turned to go inside, We should invite the whole town for a celebration next month, 5 years since we were married. Lillian smiled up at him. Elizabeth would approve, I think. Yes, he agreed softly. She would. And so would the doctor who believed in you enough to help you find your way here. In that moment, with her husband's arm around her waist and their daughter in her arms, Lillian felt profound gratitude for the painful path that had ultimately led her to this happiness. The pain she had hidden for so long had been seen, acknowledged, and gradually healed by the love of the man beside her, and the life they had created together. No one had believed her pain in Boston, but Barnett Caldwell had held her long enough to see it, to understand it, and ultimately to help her transform it into the foundation of a joy deeper than she had ever imagined possible.